everybody. This is Lost River Legends. Tonight we have a special guest with us. His name is Bill Sheehan. He hails from New York, and you guys know his name very well. He has 6 volumes out right now with Bigfoot Terror in the Woods, Sightings and Encounters. And he's going to share with us today some of those encounters. And Bill, how are you today?
Very good, very good. How you doing out there in Idaho?
We are doing great, doing great. The fall is upon us, and very much a fall blistery day today. It's definitely upon us.
Yeah, we've got the same thing occurring here now, and I want to thank you for having me on, and thank you listeners for spending some time with us here.
Absolutely, and we can't thank you enough for coming on, and we've heard some of your stories before, and we're excited to hear some of those today. So before we get into some of those stories, would you just like to kind of take the stand and introduce yourself and kind of give us an introduction into the books that you've been working on?
Yeah, no, I'd be happy to, and I'm glad that people are embracing them and enjoying the read because I enjoy putting them together. It's an ongoing work. As far as myself, I mean, I grew up in a family where my father was a pilot, and in the early days of aviation in New York, he learned to fly by basically working for lessons. He was involved in a lot of the little small airfields that used to be around the metropolitan area. I'm talking around New York. If you could picture a time when air travel was unrestricted and relatively unknown, he had an interest in planes, and he would work on people's planes for them and hang around these little airfields in exchange for gaining flight time.
Wow.
And later in life, after I was born, we had moved out from Queens, New York, which is close to Manhattan Island. And we came out into what was then farm country. The place where I now live back then was like no man's land. And in fact, one of Tesla's main laboratories is pretty much in my backyard over here. If you see some of the old photographs, it shows the building just sitting in the middle of a pine forest. And that pine forest is pretty much in my backyard right now.
Wow. That is incredible. That's a story. That's a story in and of itself, isn't it?
Yeah, and back then there was nothing out here. In fact, the Brookhaven National Laboratory sits about maybe 6 or 7 miles away from me. And my mother, during World War II, was actually a telephone operator over there. And it was called Upton, Camp Upton. And to this day, they're still coming across some unexploded ordnance here and there in the woods over there around the laboratory. People going for walks and jogs on their lunch break in the forest over there, because it's a federal lab. So you don't go in and out of that property unless you have a reason to be there and passing through a guard booth. But yeah, that's over there. And of course, out at Montauk, we had the whole Montauk Project. And there's a lot of history around Long Island and New York relative to a lot of different things. But, that's a story for another day. But as I got older, my father and I, as a young boy, we used to go out observing constellations at night. We had a little telescope. I learned basically through him, I could identify just about every plane in the sky, be it World War I, World War II, as far as warbirds, whatever commercial planes were around back then, planets. I became what I term an observer. And the reason I mention that is I believe that the people who are seeing Bigfoot know what they are looking at. We've all heard the various mumbo jumbo about maybe it was this or maybe you saw a bear. I can tell you right now that if a Bigfoot passes in front of me at 20 yards or 120 yards, I am going to know exactly what I am looking at, and to be able to tell you that emphatically that I saw a Bigfoot. So I believe that these people are in fact seeing Bigfoot, Sasquatch, whatever we want to call it, the hairy man. And the fact that other people aren't believing them makes no difference to me. I don't believe that all of these people are lying. I don't believe that they were suddenly come under the attack of a hallucinogenic drug while they were out hunting. They know what they're seeing and they're reporting it, and many of them are not reporting it because of the ridicule that they believe that they will undergo if they should say something about it.
Absolutely, and that's a big problem that we've seen in the Bigfoot community for a long time. There's a lot of negative attacks on people that have claimed to see these creatures, and these people are shut down by their family, by their friends on social media, and it makes it a lot harder for them to come forward. And that's what we want. We want these people to come forward so we can understand more about these creatures, their habitat, where the sightings have occurred. And it doesn't make it any easier for these people if they're being ridiculed and not taken seriously.
Well, just say, for me, I'm the type of person where it doesn't matter to me what you think of me personally. I have thick skin, and frankly, I just don't care. So I talk to people about a number of different subjects because I want to hear what they have to say.
Sure.
And what they say about me when I leave the room is of no consequence to me. My life goes on,
Mm-hmm.
because to me, people are going to talk about you whether you talk about Bigfoot or not. That's called gossip. So if they don't like the length of your hair or the way you speak or the car you drive, well, they're going to talk about that. If it wasn't about Bigfoot, it would be about something else.
Yeah. Well, in the world that we live in now with social media and news and how Hollywood has portrayed how people should live their lives and act and associate with different groups and whatever, it definitely makes it even harder for people to be real, not only with themselves, but with those that they associate with, because there's all these social norms that people are expected to follow.
Yeah, well, years ago and not too long ago, before television and a number of other things, people would sit around on the porch or on the steps of their houses and you'd talk for hours about a variety of different things, and there's nothing to suffer because of it. You know what I mean? Now it's ridiculous. There's so many talking heads out there giving you their opinion, whether you're asking for it or not, on this, that, and the other thing, that it's virtually impossible to remain aloof or private in your communications. Something's going to leak out somewhere, somehow, and people fear that, hey, this may cost me my job.
Exactly. So how do you think that's affected the Bigfoot community? I know we kind of touched on it a little bit, but with all these aspects of social norms and expectations, how do you think people approach Bigfoot in today's society versus maybe 30, 40 years ago?
Well, my opinion is this, that first of all, when you talk about how do people approach it, to me it depends where you live. I live in a very, if you saw what I'm calling suburbia, you would probably call it where I live the city. But comparing where I live to going further into Nassau County and then getting closer to the city, I'm in a fairly rural area, all things considered, where I live. And yet people here are so disconnected people here don't even look at wildlife for the most part. They're not even aware that there are deer walking around in their neighborhood now, because they don't even look outside. They're totally unaware of their surrounds. Now, if I said, well, how about Brett in northern Idaho? You would look at things totally different than my coworkers would here, because of the surrounding that you're in, because you're more in touch with the natural world than somebody here who's just concerned about where they're going on Friday night, who their newest boyfriend is, what kind of car they're going to lease at the end of the year. The vanity here and the focus on material goods is so inundative in a great percentage of the society that these people don't care. They don't care if there's a Bigfoot or not. They don't care how many striped bass I caught the last time I was out. Their lives revolve in a completely different sphere of influences. So I think that it's all relative to where you live, what you think and how you feel about Bigfoot or any other number of things.
Right.
We're heavily influenced by our peers and what we surround our lives with.
Right.
And that's just how I feel about it, you know?
Well, and you mentioned that the people don't care. You know, they don't care that there's wildlife around them. They don't care about the natural world that's around them. They're just so plugged into their own lives and into social media, whatever it might be. Just insert whatever that is here. It's a lot easier for them to dismiss Bigfoot or other paranormal activity because they don't care. They have their world.
Well, I was just going to say, Brett, you know, I work in a major hospital.
Right.
And, there's about 4,500 employees. And that's not counting patients and visitors that are coming in and out of the building. I have people over the past couple of years that are literally walking with their head down, looking at their iPhone, and they would crash into you if you didn't step to one side or the other or say, "Excuse me," to get their attention. They're so out of touch with what is reality that if you started breaching the subject with them about Bigfoot, which I do at work, they're just like rolling their eyes and come on, you don't actually believe that, do you? But this is what we're up against. But yet, if I was in West Virginia in Appalachia, I'd probably be met with an entirely different set of circumstances talking to the people in their small towns over there. So
right. Yeah, and that's why, these little Bigfoot communities, as I call them, whether it be on social media or if it's a physical location that these groups meet up in, it's a kind of a breath of fresh air for these people like you and I that believe in these creatures and that want to understand them more, that want to hear the stories, that want to get closer to the truth, whatever that might be. And it's nice to find those people with common ground because there's, again, like you just said, there's so many people around us that don't care, that would eye roll and would rather, have their phone or their head in the phone than in the world around them.
Yeah, it's so true what you're saying because I do everything in my power to get away from what's around me, which is one of the reasons I fish, one of the reasons I shoot. I think I said to you that I've had UFO encounters. I've had angelic encounters. I've never encountered a Bigfoot. And yet, because I believe in Bigfoot, and that was based entirely on my seeing the Patterson-Gimlin film when it first came out, which was probably in the late 60s, maybe early 70s when I first saw it. I believe from that moment forward I was sold on that movie, and to this day am sold on that movie. That was completely legitimate. It looked real to me. I didn't see anything in that picture that indicated to me that this was a fake. And so my quest began. But, I was saying to somebody a couple of months back, how much time do you spend looking at the night sky? And they were like, well, like very little, almost never. And I said, so what exactly can you expect to see in the night sky if you're not looking at it?
Right.
I mean, just think about it. When I'm out fishing, I'm observing the water, I'm observing the eddies, I'm observing the wind, I'm observing any bait I see in the water. I'm looking for splashing around. My eyes are constantly scanning the surroundings, and all of that while I have a rod in my hand and I'm paying attention to what I'm doing with that. So my senses are heightened to a certain degree based on what it is I'm doing. I need to be focused and aware of what I'm doing if I want to catch fish. Could somebody get lucky? Absolutely. Could somebody arbitrarily run into a Bigfoot? Absolutely. I mean, I have accounts of people who had one dart across the road. One guy crashed his truck into one. But I think that most of the people that are seeing Bigfoot have positioned themselves and are attentive enough and still enough within themselves that when they hear something, a crunch, a snap, a grunt, a noise, that they have the wherewithal within themselves to shut up and pay attention to what's going on. And I think that's a primitive type of skill for us that, again, we've lost over like the past 100 years because of all the noise going on around us, all the interference in our lives that keep us from feeling our senses. These kind of primeval senses that we had warning us like an animal that something's approaching. I hear something, pay attention,
Right.
But I was just going to say that people today don't think that something could cost them their lives walking through the woods.
Exactly.
And, if I'm walking out my front door and all I do is get into my 4Runner and drive to the hospital and back every day, what am I worried about a mountain lion jumping me from the rear and biting my jugular?
Right.
It doesn't even matter. It's inconsequential. It's like an impossibility.
And Bill, you touched on a point that I wanted to kind of mention before we move on, but you mentioned about all the things that people nowadays are distracted with, distracting us from ourselves, our families, distracting us from society, from nature. There's just so many things that can have our attention, mm-hmm. It's in my opinion, it's a skill, a deliberate skill that you need to acquire to snuff all that out and to focus. Like you said, you were talking about you fishing. You're focused on the waves, the eddies, your rod and reel. You're focused on all these different elements for what you're doing. And if you got your hand, one hand on the rod and one hand at holding up your phone, and it's kind of ridiculous that the world that we've kind of come to, the world that we've built around us because of all the distractions. Yeah,
and you have to choose to break that.
Exactly.
A lot of people that buy my books, they know I plug my my religious blog on the first couple of pages of my introduction for anybody that's interested. But I spend a lot of time praying, and prayer requires that I cut loose, stop doing what I'm doing, quiet myself, and get about the business of praying. Now, that's something I do. So it's entirely up to me to cut loose from everything and anything that is going on at certain points of my day and dedicate my time to that. It's a decision. And it's the same thing when we decide I'm going to go out for a walk. I'm going to go for a jog in woods. I'm going to go hunting this weekend. You know, you make a conscious decision that I'm shutting everything else off and out of my life, and I'm going to do this. My cell phone is gone. You won't be able to get in touch with me. You know, I purposed within myself that this is what I'm going to do, and this is when I'm going to do it. And unless you're willing to do that, I don't believe that your encounter with Bigfoot is going to happen anytime soon. So that's my opinion on that. You know, just these people are seeing this creature because they positioned themselves in a way that 99.999% of American society has not. Mm-hmm. And therefore, they encounter the creature.
That brings up a good point. You know, you talked earlier about the Patterson-Gimlin film, and that was the film, the moment that you really started to believe in this creature. And for the fact that we have that footage and the information and that we've been able to glean off those few moments that they collected on film has changed everything. I remember when I was younger, seeing that on TV, and I just couldn't believe it. And for how fortunate that they were at that moment in time, you know, to capture that footage. You know, they were prepared for that moment. And I feel like some of these individuals that have experienced Bigfoot, you're leading into that I feel like there might have been kind of a preparation at some point for them to encounter this creature based on whether it might be curiosity, whether it might be their readiness to accept, whether it be their understanding of all the cues surrounding, you know, a snap, a footstep, a sound, a grunt, like you were talking about. These people are very well attuned to this, everything around them, and I feel like that leads them to understand these encounters better. And because of that, they're able to share that.
Yeah, and, you know, I also believe that I'm a little different than your average bear, and I know that just from my communications with my fellow human beings in my own sphere. I mean, I'm different. I'm different than most people that I know. And I say that because I go through life believing that nothing happens by accident. I've told people before, and I'll tell you this now, I go through life with what I call my spiritual antennas up. There used to be a show called My Favorite Martian back in the 60s, where this guy's uncle was a Martian. And he looked just like a human being, and when he got in his Martian mode, these little antennas would come up out of his head on the TV show. It was just kind of funny. But I say that because I'm always in touch with the fact that why did this just happen? How come Brett Fulmer contacted me? You know, why did I hear this voice telling me to do thus, and so, and then I got this job? It's never accidental, but you'll never know it unless you're paying attention to what's going on around you and the outcome of having listened to what somebody else would have described or taken as being happenstance or accidental. Mm-hmm. So it's an individual choice, in my opinion, to allow yourself to enter into this space that the majority of society has pushed away. They're no longer in touch with it. They're no longer sensitive. We used to say in the 60s, I got a bad vibe, or I got a good vibe. And there's a lot of truth to that. the sensitivity of a person knowing they've entered into a dangerous situation and it's time to get out. So many people, after 9/11, when the Twin Towers came down, so many people have come forward through years saying, I decided to stay home from work that day. Well, did you decide? Or were you really prompted to stay home from work that way, and you're saying you decided? Or the car wouldn't start. And I was late for the train. Otherwise, I would have been there on the, 30th floor or whatever.
Right.
So these things happen more often than we tend to think about. And I don't think that most people give them any thought at all as having happened.
Which is incredibly unfortunate that people are not willing to accept that there could be, in my opinion, and I think in yours, due to our Christian backgrounds, divine intervention or angelic intervention, whatever you want to call it, from a greater power that is trying to protect us from harm.
Yep.
And I've had the thought several times. I commute about 30 miles every day, one way, so about 60 miles a day. I'm so familiar with that commute. I've been doing it for 5 years, and I could drive it with my eyes closed. But there's been a lot of times where we have a slow driver in front of us, and I'm in a hurry, or there's an accident up front of us, and it's delaying my commute to work. And I keep thinking sometimes maybe that's on purpose, because if I was 3 or 5 miles ahead or just a few moments ahead, I could have gotten an accident. There could have been something that
you'll never know.
And I'll never know. You're right.
Mm-hmm. So this is, it's also, and it's something I wrestle with all the time, stilling yourself, calming yourself, trying to stay in the moment, not getting too anxious or ahead of what's going on today, tomorrow, or even next month.
Right.
Stay in today. Don't project what is or is not going to happen, because things can change dramatically from hour to hour, from day to day. What you think today may not be tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
So it's important to remain focused and just be, I went to school for Oriental medicine, and part of our teaching in this college was we were required to take Tai Chi classes. And we spoke in these Tai Chi classes about something called kinesthetic awareness. And that is simply, there's nothing simple about it, but to state simply, it is being aware of your position in space and time, which we could talk about for hours, but we won't.
That's another show, maybe, right?
Yeah, it's a self-awareness of who you are, where you are, and your surroundings, which is something that you don't hear anything about today, unless you were training in classes like I was, where, the Oriental pathology of disease and whatnot was being discussed on a daily basis, and all the principles of yin and yang and all of this other stuff. So it was part of what we were learning, so we were being fed it on a regular basis, Mm-hmm. But there was a lot to be said for many of the things they were talking about. Great.
Well, Bill, why don't we get into one of the first stories that you want to share with us today?
Yes, I actually have a surprise for you today.
Oh, awesome.
I was going through some of the testimonials that I have, and I actually pulled one out from your home state of Idaho. And this is a great encounter. So why not just get into it?
Yep.
This rather chilling encounter was brought to my attention by a guy named Dennis Ryder, a longtime resident of your home state of Idaho. And this is actually what happened to Dennis and his friend while elk hunting. I believe it was in October of 2006. So Dennis said, my hunting partner, Ronnie, and I were heading into the hill country of northern Idaho in the hope of scoring our first bull elk of the season. The plan for the morning was that Ron was going to circumvent the mount while I made my way up to the ridgeline. We had put a timeline on how long we believed it would take me to get to the top, as well as for Ronnie to get into position on the other side. After a steady and rigorous climb of over an hour, I made it to the ridge and was positioning myself in an area where I believed the elk would be funneled into, running up the slope to get away from Ronnie. The plan was that Ronnie would begin a somewhat noisy flush of anything on the opposite slope, thereby driving them up to the ridge where I would be waiting for them. I had been sitting on the ridge for about 25 minutes after making the climb, and yet I hadn't heard anything of Ron coming from below. Without warning, I heard the sound of hooves running on the gravel and coming up the wash that I was hidden near. A spike elk came bolting up the slope, leaping over the other side only 25 feet away from my position. No sooner had I turned my head to watch the spike make its leap than did I hear what I will describe as a deep, guttural breathing coming from where the buck had ascended through this wash. This breathing was accompanied by the sound of rocks crunching, unlike the sound of the elk's small hooves had made. Mind you, what I am talking about happened in a matter of seconds, not minutes. I had just turned my head in response to the new sound coming from the gravel wash when a Sasquatch, with what appeared to be two fast leaps, had ascended about 20 feet of this wash and stopped directly in front of me. He was looking directly at me in the exact spot where I had seen the spike leap over the ridge, only 25 feet away. There was nowhere to run and nowhere to hide. The volume of its breathing was intense as I was watching its chest pump in and out with every breath it took. In its right hand, the beast was holding what appeared to be at least a 10-pound rock, and it was rolling it around in its hand like a major league pitcher selecting his grip for a pitch with a hardball. I lowered my gun. He started to rotate his head and began to emit a low, growling roar. It was similar in sound and volume to that made by a lion at the circus, the sound of which penetrated my very being. I can't fully say why I didn't pull the trigger, but in the moment, as I look back on it, I believe I was uncertain if one bullet would have taken it down. My thought being that before I could chamber a second, I would be a dead man. I could now hear Ronnie shouting faintly from below in response to having heard the growl which the beast had made, but I wasn't going to shout in the presence of this monster. The same time that I heard Ronnie's voice, the creature had turned in response to it and flung the rock sidearm down the slope in Ronnie's direction. He then clenched his fists, which were the size of basketballs, and showed me his teeth. To me, the facial expression that the Sasquatch was making said to me, I am going to kill you and kill you now. It was then that I pulled the trigger. I hit the beast square in the neck, and he fell to the ground, holding his throat and screaming. Ronnie's voice was much louder now, but there was no way he could come any faster, as the slope was very steep. I was now shouting at him while fumbling to chamber another round. This was a single-shot bolt-action rifle, and I dropped the round. I was shaking so hard that I couldn't function. The beast was back on its feet and screaming, with blood pouring down its chest. I feared the worst, but with one superhuman leap, it launched itself down the slope and disappeared, whining and screaming as it did so. I started to shout to Ron that I was all right, and 10 minutes later, he had finally made it to my position. When he asked me what had gone down, I showed him the blood-soaked ground where the Sasquatch had fallen, and I told him everything that had happened, and he couldn't believe it. Ronnie said that when he heard the roaring, he didn't know what to think. It didn't sound like a bear to him, and yet he thought that a bear had attacked me. After all, what else could it have been? This creature was so close to me that I could smell him, and he stunk badly. The odor was along the lines of roadkill and an open cesspool. After it had gone, the smell was still permeating my nostrils. It was so bad that it almost seemed toxic to me. In fact, when Ronnie had reached the ridge, he said, "What's that stink?" The beast was all of 5 feet wide at the armpits and close to 6 feet wide at the shoulders. The jaw protruded outward and its brow hung over its eyes, which gave it a very strange appearance. The entire body had scraggly brown hair on it, and it appeared to be filthy dirty from head to toe. His hands and feet were massive, and his bodily hair overhung the sides of his feet like it was the fringe on a decorative pillowcase. When it showed me its teeth, they were both blackened and yellowed. Its bicuspids were about a half-inch longer than the rest of its bite. I could see how it could survive. I can't see how it could survive a shot to the throat with all of the blood that was coming out of its body, but it was able to get up and flee. This animal, and I do mean animal, had come up the slope that we struggled with as though it was nothing. Yes, it was breathing heavy, but it had obviously chased the elk up the hillside, which is no easy task in and of itself, while also carrying a heavy rock. The fact that he was clutching this boulder told me that it was a weapon that he intended to use against the elk when he got close to it. It was the most incredible thing that you can imagine experiencing, and yet I more than likely could have died that day had it not been for Ronnie calling out to me. I will never know. So there you have it.
Absolutely terrifying. Wow.
Yeah.
That is just nuts.
Yeah, I mean, this poor guy, I can totally relate to him fumbling with the second round. I can only imagine, you know, he must have just been vibrating in fear.
You know, these hunters, they often talk about buck fever. You know, when they finally see the animal, they have the rifle or their weapon in hand, and they just got that energy, that adrenaline flowing through them. And I can't imagine how many more levels this man had that beyond the normal hunter. I mean, this guy's staring down this creature that you said was 6 feet wide at the shoulders. Who knows how tall?
Yeah, I mean, I don't even know what keeps you alive at that moment. You know, like heart attack or fainting, or it's just, you cannot place yourself in that situation. It's something you would have to live. to appreciate the magnitude of it. You know, like, okay, so I write it down in my book and I read it to you. But plug yourself into this situation alone on the top of this mount on this ridge line, hearing the noise, seeing the animal, and then this thing appears in front of you. I mean, you know, it's so far beyond the realm of human cognitive thinking that there's no way to really understand what this guy went through in a matter of, you know, maybe a minute's time.
Right. No, that's terrifying. I can't even imagine. You know, one interesting thing that I picked up is there's several accounts of these Bigfoot that will hunt with rocks. They'll chuck these rocks at these elk or these deer, you know, hit their leg or their back, and you know, if it can, you know, its fists were the size of, you say, basketballs. You know, this 10-pound rock is nothing. It's nothing. You know. Wow.
But also, the fact that he saw that, he said that the creature threw the rock sidearm down the hillside towards his friend Ronnie's voice. So he didn't take it like I would throw a hardball overhand.
Mm-hmm.
Now, whether or not that was just coincidence or he just let it go sidearm, who knows? We'll never know.
Yeah.
But it was interesting to me that it was a sidearm fling of this boulder, just like in an act of frustration. It was almost as if the creature was doubly mad that he got interrupted chasing what may have been dinner, and now he's meeting up with this human being that he now has to contend with, and somebody else shouting down the hill. It was almost like he was like a baby would jump up and down, stomping their feet because they couldn't get what they want. You know,
very frustrated. I'm sure. You know, there's
very.
There's another account similar to this one, coincidentally, in Idaho, where a hunter was out there hunting some elk, and he hears this elk coming through, and it just runs right past him, and the thing's just winded, it's sweating, it's just exhausted. I mean, its legs are gone because it's just been running so much. And sure enough, here comes this Bigfoot, and it encounters the hunter, and they have this little moment, and it had a rock in its hand too, and it had flipped. The individual that was relating the story said that it flicked the rock away. You know, I'm sure it was a big rock. Flicked it away with its fingers as to just let it go, and turned around and walked away. But he said that this rock just went flying. Like, he's like, I couldn't throw it that far, and this thing just kind of like casually flicked it with its fingers, and it just goes launching.
Yeah, well, their strength is off the charts. You can't even relate to the type of strength that these creatures possess. I mean, we've all seen the pictures of damage that a grizzly bear can do. I've seen camera footage of grizzly bears ripping boards off the cabins to gain access. And it doesn't even look like they're putting any effort into it. It looks like they lift their paw up and it's on the edge of the board, and they just kind of retract their leg, and the board comes flying off. You know, and you or I would be banging at this thing with a 16-inch long framing hammer and a crowbar, trying to do the same thing. You know.
Mm-hmm. Wow, that's incredible.
Yeah, just beyond the pale as far as strength.
So, remind us what volume is that story out of in your books?
That is actually out of my latest volume, which will be out in a few weeks, probably. Volume 6.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah, that's coming out of the latest one. Now, I'd really like to share with you. This is really interesting, and when we talk about the strength of these creatures, I think that you and the audience would like to hear this story. Now, this story, as you're about to hear, had no sighting, but it was the evidential presentation, if you will, passed on from an uncle to a nephew, and then, as you will see, it was shared between the two of them many years later, that will just blow your mind as to what these things are capable of. This actually came from Volume 1, and I entitled it the Vancouver Evidence. And this is basically an evidentiary story which was passed down from an uncle to a nephew. And from here on out, I'll basically be reading to you and the listeners Reggie LaCar's testimony as to what happened to him and his friend and what his Uncle Frank had showed them. This is Reggie LaCar. I was born and raised in the Vancouver area. In college, I had achieved a degree in electrical engineering and found myself working for a startup company in Spokane, Washington. While there, I made friends with a coworker, Clifford Wells, from Pennsylvania. He, too, was an engineer, and during one of our many dinners together and after indulging in a brew or two, we overheard some characters at the bar shouting and laughing with each other about Bigfoot. At some point, I asked Cliffy what he thought about the beast. And after Cliffy tried to make some lofty and skeptical comments, I reached into my wallet and pulled out a picture. It was the famous Patty picture, and I passed it to Cliff. He commented that he had seen it before, and he knew that it was a still from a Cowboys film clip, which had supposedly been taken in the woods back in the 50s. I told him that my uncle had given this to me when I was young, and that it had come with a warning. The warning was to always carry more gun than you think you need when you go into the woods. And I carry the picture as a reminder of that warning. I began to share my uncle's story with Cliff, that he and his logging crew were actually run off a job by these things many years ago up in the Canadian woods. Cliff interrupted to ask me if my uncle was still alive and then asked if it was possible to visit him, stating that he would really like to talk to him about the experience and hear the story firsthand. During a little summer vacation around the 4th of July, he and I went to visit my Uncle Frank. We found ourselves sitting in his modest home chatting about what I had said to Cliff in the picture I had shown him. At some point, Uncle Frank made a once-in-a-lifetime offer. Hey, listen, fellas, if you'd like, we can go up to the old logging site where I can show you some really weird stuff. Who doesn't like to see weird stuff? We certainly wouldn't turn down the opportunity, so we took off in his truck the next day. It's actually quite funny because my uncle never invited me to see anything before. Having a friend with me must have been my golden ticket. We drove for about 90 minutes until we reached a break in the woods where Uncle Frank turned off the road and onto a low mountainside where I thought the suspension was going to fall out from under us. Eventually, the trail was so rutted it became impassable, but thankfully we weren't too far from the final destination, so we got out and walked. Now, Uncle Frank was 76 years old, but he was still in good enough shape that he could challenge a bear to an arm wrestling match and probably win. The mile-long hike up the rest of the mountain was nothing for him. Eventually, we reached a flat-top area that he called either a stage or a landing, though I really don't remember which it was. He told us that many jobs had involved clearing out hillsides where severe windstorms had downed a lot of trees. These locations were what they called windfall. First, they would create a flat work area above where the trees needed to be taken, and from there they would place a type of machine with a big boom on it, from which a thick cable would be run down to the base of the hillside by the crew. The cable would be secured to the top of a large tree at the bottom of the hill, creating somewhat of a cable tightrope from the bottom to the top of the work area. The men would work down the hill, trimming up the trees that were knocked down and cutting down the trees which still remained standing. Once downed, they would wrap a cable around the trees in bunches, and this cable being attached to a hoist or a trolley which was suspended from the overhead cable. The overhead trolley would then pull the trees back up the hill to the staging area. As we stood and looked the area over, the place was a mess. It looked like a large bomb had gone off, leveling everything. Though there was quite a bit of new growth that had crept up over the years, the evidence of the work that these men had performed was still more than evident. After a moment, my uncle said, "If you can navigate your way down over in that direction, you will come across some old oil and fuel drums. Take a good look at them, and when you come back, we will have a talk about what you have seen. Go slow, watch your step so that you don't sprain an ankle or worse." Now, when they cleared an area, they really didn't clear it at all. They took the money lumber and left everything else behind in a junk heap. Walking through the heap was like walking through and over a plate of spaghetti, only the spaghetti was made of tree branches, brush, and debris. Finally, we reached the drums. They were old, rusty, and crushed, but they all seemed to be sealed and relatively full, with the exception of a couple of instances where the welds on the drums had rusted out. Most of the other drums were still fully intact, but the tops and bottoms of each and every drum were bulging outward, as though some sort of pressure from within had forced them out. But that wasn't the weirdest thing. Each of the drums was cinched or squeezed in and around the middle, forming them into enormous hourglasses. Upon close inspection, there was no indication to our eyes of a chain or a rope having been wrapped around them and cinched tight to force this shape. There were no visible scratches or grooves in the metal, and many of them had a good amount of paint still on them. These were industrial 50-gallon steel drums, and you could still smell diesel, gasoline, and oil in the area all around them. If he hadn't told us where to go, I don't believe that anyone else could have found them. Many were wedged in piles of branches and debris. When we climbed back up to the landing area, and what a freaking ordeal that was, coming down was one thing, but getting back up was quite another, and the crew had to deal with that mess every single day. These men must have been animals. When we reached the top, completely winded from the climb, Uncle Frank laughed at us, saying, "The two of you guys are wimps. So tell me, what did you see down there? I want to hear all about it." We described the drums to him just like we described them to you. And then he told us to take a seat. He told us that he and his crew of 7 men had come to this site in the usual way. They had everything set to begin work and had begun to go about their business. The 50-gallon drums were kept on the staging area. They contained lubricant, grease, diesel, and gasoline, everything that the machinery needed to operate. It was a large tract of timber, and they knew that they would be there for quite a while to clear it all out. When they arrived back to the job site on the morning of the second day, they saw that there had been some damage done to the equipment overnight. Odd things were broken, smashed, or twisted, similar to destruction that would be left by vandals. They couldn't even begin work until many of the things were fixed, and they had to go back into town to get the tools and parts required for the repairs. It had only been one day, and they were already losing money. After the second day, on the third day, the same thing happened. They came back to the site in the morning, only to find that much of the equipment had been damaged again. In fact, some of the things they had just fixed were broken in the same way as before. The owner, who was also a worker, was furious. he was cursing wildly and accusing an industry rival of sabotaging the job site. If the other guy had been there, be he guilty or not, there would have been bloodshed for sure. Knowing that they might be dealing with vandals, the boss decided to put an armed guard at the site. He approached two characters from a local gin mill, offering them $50 a night to stay at the site with their rifles until morning. This went on for about a week, and every night they built a big fire and sat there until the morning. After the guards were posted, nothing happened. We worked without interruption for that entire week, so the boss got tired of shelling out $50 a day and told them they wouldn't be needed anymore. He figured whoever had been doing the damage would not waste their time coming to the site anymore, knowing there were guards waiting there. The very next day, no fire had been made overnight, and there were no armed guards watching the site. When we arrived in the morning, all of the supply drums were gone. In a rage, the boss left the site and returned with 4 more drums, and that night he decided to stay there himself. This time, he wasn't going to light a fire. He was going to sit quietly in the cab of the crane with his shotgun, and whoever showed up was going to get a belly full of lead. Well, the next morning when the crew arrived, the boss was nowhere to be found. The door was opened on the cab, and the door handle had been torn off. We searched for him for hours and hours, shouting his name throughout the woods, working our way up and down the hill, scouring every square inch as best as we could. The only thing that we found was his 12 gauge, which was about 100 feet away from the cab, and it was bent in half, like something from a Superman episode. Worried, one of the guys went back to town to get the police. The next 2 days were spent assisting a massive search, but they never found his body. Only his hat and the 4 drums that had been brought to the job site that day were located. The search team found them in the same area as the 5 from the previous day's disappearance, right where they lie today, squeezed around the middle and thrown clear down the hill. Something had picked up these several 100-pound drums, crushed them around the middle, and hurled them 80 feet away. No human being or beings could have done such a thing. To this vet day, the boss is still listed as a missing person. Something was not happy about a lumber crew invading their neighborhood. That's for damn sure. What do you think of that?
Wow. That's frightening. Absolutely frightening. I can't even imagine.
And his Uncle Frank, having never seen a Bigfoot, knew what he was up against. And when he had gotten his hands on this photograph, cutting it out of a magazine or a book or whatever, he gave it to the kid, because now it was his belief. This is what had done all of this. And you need to watch your ass when you're out there in the woods. And he warned him to always carry more gun than you think you're going to need.
Wow. You know, it's interesting you say 50-gallon drum. You know, I had just acquired 2 50-gallon drums for water storage in my basement. And I filled those up this year. And I can't move the dang things. Once they're full, I mean, they're stuck until you drain them. And here's these things being hurled 80 feet from where they were originally located. And not only that they were completely crushed like a pop can.
Yeah, and there was no way, from the description of the hillside, he said they were climbing through spaghetti made of trees and branches. There's no way all of these drums are rolling accidentally through that type of debris field and all landing in a similar area together like in a heap.
Right, and all being damaged in a very similar way. It's just not going to happen.
No, and they were all of them had been crushed to the extent that the ends had bulged out from the fluid being forced in two directions. And, you know, first of all, if you're in an industrial setting where you're using 50-gallon drums, it would only be in a place that had smooth concrete floors where you could use dollies on it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the hand trucks for carrying a 50-gallon drum are usually made out of iron or wooden iron. They have hard caster wheels on it, and they're meant to be rolled on a hard concrete or polished surface.
Mm-hmm.
You don't just, even if you took these off of the back of a truck, you'd have to have a hydraulic tailgate or some type of machinery where a couple of guys could get on it and kind of roll it a little bit to the gate and then lower it down and then kind of muffle it and roll it around a little bit in this direction or that direction.
Mm-hmm.
You don't just grab. Nobody just grabs a 50-gallon drum.
Right.
And they said there was no evidence around the metalwork of the drum of anything having been used to cause the cinching.
Right. Nothing mechanical like a chain or some kind of a come along or something like that. That could be a culprit.
And then really, to what end? To what end? They knew the equipment that was on the site. They had a cable running straight up and down from this boom truck or whatever it was going to the bottom of the hill. There wasn't like there was anything, you know, being directed over to where these drums were, you know, to the left or to the right, whatever direction it was. Yet there was no overhead equipment or anything that could have picked these up and reached out and just dropped them, you know. You're talking Vancouver, Canada, you know, in the middle of a forest on the side of a hill. You know what? There's nothing there.
Right. You know, and I've heard encounters like this where logging equipment has been damaged. There's several cases that I've heard about where, you know, their tractors, any equipment that they might have, chainsaws, different things like that, are completely obliterated because these things come along supposedly and just have a heyday and do it very easily, and they're damaging equipment that industrial metal, steel, whatever equipment, iron, and it's just nothing to these things. It's incredible.
Yeah, well, I wanted to share that with you just to give you an idea of just some incredible strength. You know, I'm on board with this guy. I think he was spot on giving the kid the picture and then him relaying the story about what happened. He didn't see anything. He only saw evidence left behind and said, frankly, no human being could do this. I mean, I thought that was a fairly intelligent thing to say. He simply made the jump that no guy or group of guys had come up here to do this, and that's discounting the fact that the owner then comes up thinking he's a wise ass. He's going to sit in the dark all night with his shotgun and give somebody a belly full of lead, and he ends up disappearing. His gun is bent. The door is wrenched off of the side of the truck with the handle being torn off, and he's a missing person. He's gone. So I really believe, and I have another testimonial in Book 6 about a couple of D9 dozers being sabotaged in the woods of Washington on a construction crew that was hired to create fire trails and trails for power lines. And, you know, we won't get into that today, but a number of these creatures have the wherewithal to know that, first of all, they probably don't like the noise. Second of all, if they watch and see what's being done from afar, they obviously have the wherewithal to know that these guys are destroying my house.
Absolutely.
So, you know,
and it's like you're in my world, you're in my house. This is my territory, and you better listen to our little hints here that you need to stay out. Leave us alone.
Yeah. Well, and can you blame them?
Yeah.
You know, most animals can't really defend themselves. I mean, a bear can come at you if you get too close and they're pissed off. They'll charge you. But most animals run when they see human, you know. But these guys were able to come back when they weren't around. So they had the intelligence, if you want to call it that, to know that, you know, they're gone for the day. Now let's go and mess them up. And, you know, I don't know. What do you say about that? Is that intelligent? Is that instinctive behavior? I don't know how you label it. I call it intelligence, you know.
I agree. I think that these creatures, you know, I don't necessarily think that every single one of them, you know, collectively is at the same level of intelligence. You know, we look at the humans across the globe, and we're all different shapes, sizes, races, colors, different intelligent levels.
Right.
And we see that in the Bigfoot community, all the sightings that are out there. I mean, you got short ones, you got big ones, you got thin ones, you got hairy ones, you got some that don't have much hair. And the intelligence is going to be all over the place as well. But with these ones, the intelligence is there, but then the strength that you're talking about is there. And these things must have been huge. I mean, just massive. And so these are probably ones that are you know, protecting a group of Bigfoots, be it children or females, whatever. You know, who knows? But yeah. I definitely think that there's a level of intelligence there that these people, or these things, didn't mean to say people, but these things are wise enough to stay away until the humans leave, mess with their stuff, leave, and I'm interested to know what happened with the owner of the company. You know, he's in this crane, and you know, what was the confrontation like?
Yeah, and we don't know, and for all we know, this guy could have nodded out. He could have fallen asleep in the middle of the night, and this thing just came up and got the jump on him.
Right, absolutely.
But even if it didn't get the jump on him because he was sleeping, if I had the strength to just come up and rip the door open before you could even point the gun at me, I'm already crushing your head, and the battle's over.
Yeah, and
you don't even have time to think. You're dead.
Yep, and these things know what guns are. They know what weapons are, and that's the only thing that can do some damage to them, or at least slow them down, and they're going to eliminate that threat as soon as possible. So, obviously, shotgun bent in half, gone, threat eliminated, and now let's take this guy out and do it in one blow.
Yeah, and I firmly believe that maybe not all of them. I think that, and it's only a thought, I think that a majority of them know what a gun is. And they may not be able to intellectually, in some capacity, say, hey, I'm about to be shot, run away. Because I've had so many encounters where guys have shot these things, unloaded on them with shotguns in their yard, on their farm. Rifle shots. You just heard in a Ridgeline encounter. This guy pulled the trigger. He says he shot the thing in the neck, and it got up and got away.
Yeah. And at close range. I mean, 20, what'd you say, 20, 25 feet?
Yeah, whatever, 40 feet. Who cares what it was? You know, if it hits you or me, we're gone.
Yep.
So I don't know. I had an account called the Pheasant Hunters. And just briefly, this guy put both barrels of an over and under on a Sasquatch jumping out of a briar patch. And he had an interesting comment. He said that both barrels of his 7.5 shot hit this thing and it didn't even flinch. And he made the jump talking about an elephant. He said that a shotgun wouldn't do anything to an elephant unless you hit him in the eye. But we use a certain type of gun to take down an elephant, and we call it the elephant gun. It has enough load and enough weight to bang through the hide of an elephant, and if placed in the right area, kill them. But he put 2 barrels on this Sasquatch, and the thing didn't even flinch. It just kept running. So he made the connection that possibly the skin, or depending on what body part or section you hit on these things, it may have little effect on them.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I'm not saying they don't go back to wherever they're living and lick their wounds.
Right.
But it's not enough to knock them down.
Well, and they're not bulletproof, right? I mean, it's not like it just bounced off its skin and there was nothing. I mean, it probably did some damage and it probably hurt, but it wasn't enough for this thing to just, you know,
stop them.
Right. And, you know, in a lot of those accounts, the chests on these things and the muscle mass on these things is just incredible. I mean, it leaves you speechless when you hear some of the sizes of these things where, you know, I think one of the accounts you had mentioned, it was like 2 50-gallon drums welded together was the upper body, the chest of this thing. And if you look at that in proportion, that's a lot of meat to shoot through. That's a lot of bone to shoot through, a lot of skin. And so these things are built like tanks. I mean, they're monsters. Some of these things are.
Now, my friend Danny was just at my house today. He's kind of a jack of all trades, and I had him over my house this very day to do some yard work for me. And he's a big deer hunter. He pulls out his cell phone and he shows me a picture of a doe he had just taken, I think yesterday or the day before. And he had it skinned. He hadn't butchered it yet. He had it laying on a table and he had it skinned. And he had opened up the side to show his arrow that was still in it. And the arrow had gone directly through the heart. It looked like a Valentine's Day card.
Oh, wow.
And he wanted to show it to me. You know, he's always, he's not bragging, but he's proud of what he does, you know. And he had to share this photo. He's probably showing it to everybody he knows. And I said to myself, wow, he took this thing from a tree stand, put this arrow right through the heart, and still the thing ran for a while before he got it. So the animals, you know, and that's just a little doe. This was like, you know, 100-pound doe or something, if it was 100 pounds. And the fact that they can go, having been mortally wounded, that in and of itself is something that we can't wrap our minds around as a human being, you know?
Mm-hmm. Sure.
So, yeah, I just thought I'd share that because there's certainly a Bigfoot. If you're talking about a creature that weighs 1,000, the numbers these people throw out there about the weight of these things is just ridiculous. You know, 1,000 pounds, 1,500 pounds. One lady and her husband said it was the size of a Clydesdale horse standing in front of us. Have you ever been next to a Clydesdale horse?
I have at the state fair, and
I mean, they're just crazy. When you're standing near one of them, it's like, what?
Well, and with those horses, I mean, their muscles, you see them shift their weight, you see them walk. You can see every flipping muscle in its shoulders or in its backside, and it just blows you away. And you think about a Sasquatch being that big, and the muscles on the same thing. You can see the muscles rippling under the hair. It's terrifying.
Yeah, and don't forget that the Sasquatch is living their life in the woods. They're not wandering around some farm eating grits out of a barrel and drinking water out of a trough.
Exactly.
You know, these things are working every day of their life, doing whatever it is they do to survive. And speaking of which, I have a couple of accounts, one from the rainforest in Northern California, and another one from Washington State where people saw Sasquatch raiding nests in trees.
Interesting.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm not sharing them with you today, but I'm just sharing the data with you that both of these accounts, one by a woman and one by a man, had seen a Sasquatch well up into a tree, clutching the tree like a climber and reaching into a nest with the hand going hand in mouth either eating eggs or chicks or whatever, but they definitely knew that this was a source of nutrition. And the fact that two different people saw it a number of different years apart in two different locations, these things are well adapted to take advantage of any situation that's put before them, and that would include coming into your backyard and robbing your chickens if you had them in a coop raising eggs. They'd be more than happy to help themselves to anything you're offering.
Oh, absolutely. And, you hear these things, eating chickens off farms, taking out hogs, breaking the necks of horses or cows. And yeah, I mean, these things they're built to deal with anything out there. Absolutely.
Yeah, there's no problem. I had an account, the Catherine Lake encounter. I believe it was in not Vermont, Maine. The couple was renting a cabin, just light vacationing, doing some canoeing on Catherine Lake. They got up in the morning. They were paddling around the shoreline. They came around a bend, and there was a female moose in very shallow water, reaching down and just eating some vegetation. And they were sitting off in the canoe watching her, enjoying the early part of the day. And, and the husband points out something dark moving in the grass next to the lake behind this cow moose. So now they're watching the moose and they're watching whatever this is moving. And the long and short of it was, at some point, this Sasquatch leaps out of the grass, lunging forward and wrapping its hands and arm around the neck of this moose, driving its head down into the lake bottom. Just like this kamikaze attack from the rear on this moose that's feeding in the shallows. Drives its freaking head into the lake bottom, broke its neck, suffocated it, whatever happened in the attack. The couple started paddling out immediately into deeper water because the water they were in was only a couple of feet deep, and they figured this freaking thing could just run over here and get us. They went out into the lake watching this thing, and they said the moose had just dropped. It was dead. The Sasquatch looked at them, took the moose by the neck, and walked out of the lake with the moose like it was nothing.
You're kidding me.
I mean, think about dragging a moose home for dinner. I mean, just what? You're a hunter. Well, you live in Idaho.
Mm-hmm.
What the heck does a grown female moose weigh?
Oh, geez. As much or more than a horse. What? 1,200 pounds? 1,500 pounds? I don't know.
I was going to say 800, 1,000, whatever.
Yeah.
This thing grabbed this moose that it just did in and just basically held it under its arm and walked out of the lake with it into the woods, and that was the end of their encounter. So they were there for an attack, and then this thing being dragged off, and that was it, But
right.
Just like,
well, and you talked about the Clydesdales a few minutes ago, and you look at the necks on those things, even just on a regular horse. I mean, those things are huge, and it's just muscle and sinew and bones, and it's just massive and just powerful. And you think about a moose, it's bigger than an average horse, an average quarter horse, say.
Right.
Just the strength. It's interesting that it had pounced on that thing and just drove its head into the ground, into the water. Interesting move.
To me, it showed also that it had experience in doing that.
Oh, yeah. And
it may be something that happens more frequently than anyone will ever know. And these people were in this cabin on the side of the lake. There's nobody around. They're up early in the morning paddling a canoe around on a pristine lake. It wasn't like they were at Yeah, it wasn't like they were at Six Flags, A Great Adventure.
Thank goodness.
They had the place to themselves, or so they thought,
Wow.
And, it reminds me, too, like I told you, I'm always watching, I'm always looking. I'm a birder, fishing, all of these different things. I'm out in my yard one day, and, we get to know that when the birds are still, or when they disappear from the feeder, that the hawks are around.
Mm-hmm.
And, once in a blue moon, you'll catch some type of attack happening. My wife, maybe 5 years ago, 6 years ago, she said she was out on the deck behind my house and heard a cat scream. And when she turned her head into the neighbor's property, a red-tailed hawk was on top of the cat, clutching it. So the cat apparently made some maneuvers or whatever, according to her, and it got away, and the bird then just took off. But, it's just one of those things. These birds are out every day feeding on stuff: snakes, rats, mice, rabbits, in this case, a stray cat. And when do you ever see that happen?
Mm-hmm.
Like, never.
Yep. But it happens every single day. They have to.
Yeah, but it's going on all the time. But the amount that people actually see it is like slim and none.
Yeah.
And she just happened to, like a number of years ago, I saw another red tail, which are a pretty big bird around here. They're a big raptor. Was taken off out of a field with about a 7-foot-long black racer snake. And I'm seeing this thing taken into the air, and the snake is writhing around in its claws, and this thing was flying away. And I said, boy, this is going to be some sight to see it as this thing's flying over the highway with the snake writhing around. Everybody in their car is going to be like, what the freak is that? But this type of stuff goes on every day, They have to eat, they have to hunt. And if you're fortunate enough to be watching and be in the right place at the right time, you're going to see it,
Sure.
So.
Well, Bill, man, this has been a wild ride today. I can't thank you enough for coming on. This has just been incredible. Had some good talks, some good discussion, and the stories that you've shared have just been mind-boggling. I'm still reeling over the hunter shooting that one in the neck. It's just incredible.
Now, did you have a little time left, or are you done?
Yeah, I got about 15 minutes or so. So if you have another encounter, that would be great.
Yeah, well, I really wanted to share with your readers the Mount Rose. I called it the Mount Rose Trail Night Encounter. Which I think we had spoken about, but this encounter was so terrifying, and many of them are terrifying. When people say, well, tell me everybody wants to hear the worst of the worst, give me the most incredible one you have. I mean, to me, they're all incredible. But, of course, people like to hear about the attack or the close call or whatever, and this is certainly... stands at the apex of some of the most terrifying encounters that I have. This story was brought to my attention by a guy named Billy Bills. And that is correct, almost like Bill, only Billy Bills. And that is his name. And from this point forward, it will be Billy and his hiking partner Rex sharing the events that they experienced during their night hike. Billy starts off, and Rex kind of comes in here and there, but I won't bother telling you when and if a change is made. Rex and I had done this hike numerous times during different months of the year, each providing us with a different set of challenges. In particular, during the winter, the snow near the summit can be waist deep. Regardless of that, during any winter or even late spring hikes, you will most definitely need walking poles and spikes. This is an extremely difficult hike in anyone's book, and I'm sure many people turn back having begun it. The left side of the trail can be quite treacherous, presenting you with many switchbacks and some very steep inclines where you are more mountain climbing than hiking. From Hoodsport, you head west 9 miles on Lake Cushman Road until you reach Forest Service Road number 24. Turning left, you proceed 3 miles until you see the trailhead sign on your right. There are several things I will caution your readers about. During this hike, you are virtually enclosed in the forest the entire time, and on many occasions, after you reach the summit, you find that you are encased in fog, obscuring all of your views. From the top, you can see Mounts Rainier, Adams, and St. Helens. Further off in the distance, you are looking at the Olympics, and below you is Lake Cushman, which is breathtaking in and of itself. There are also times of the year when yellow jackets are swarming. There are so many of them that you can loudly hear them as you are approaching, and they will attack you. Now that I have thoroughly discouraged you, let me say that when things and conditions go right, this hike is one for the books. Well worth the effort. Although it is touted to be some 5.5 miles in length, on my GPS I have clocked it at more or less 7.5 miles. I would also advise anyone to bring twice as much water as they think they will need, and if you have soft feet, bring Band-Aids as well. Last time that Billy and I were in here, we hiked up on a cougar that was less than 10 feet from the trail, and it took off like a rocket. This time around, we were planning to do our second night hike. There are absolutely no words to describe sitting at the summit at 4 a.m. under the canopy of the night sky. I actually pity humanity for not experiencing such beauty in their lifetime. Rex and I were getting set to go, and it was about 1:15 a.m. when we began the hike. It was late July of 2010, and the night was pristine, to say the least. Being well familiar with this trail, we had made it to the summit in about 2.5 hours. I must also warn you that the hike begins at about 700 feet of elevation, and at the peak, you're at 4,300 feet. I only say that because this hike is steep and arduous the entire time that you are in it. Having achieved the summit, we laid back on our packs enveloped by the night sky. As I was laying there, I felt as though the sky was drawing me into itself, and I was thinking that I was at one with the universe. Mere words cannot describe what we were feeling at the time. After about 90 minutes or so, we began our descent down the right-hand side of the mount. This side is somewhat easier than the left, and of course we were now going downhill as well. I must say that for those of you who are not night owls, your eyes actually do get quite accustomed to the dark, and you can see reasonably well, all things considered. On this trail, you are literally in trees the entire time, with only a few occasional breaks overlooking the slopes and some well-dispersed living and dead timber. It was during one of these breaks that I was certain I had seen something large and dark move quickly across a small clearing on the slope. The area it had moved across was maybe 30 or 40 feet away, tops, and it was very tall and large. We conversed briefly, kicking around as to what it could have been, and continued our hike. A few minutes later, both of us heard what was clearly some rocks and debris tumbling down the same slope to our right. Now understand me, please. When you are alone in these conditions, hiking in the dark, your senses are most certainly heightened, and we began to feel like we were being stalked and or watched, and we were far from reaching the bottom. The difficulty became keeping our focus on the trail and our footing in the dark while still being acutely aware that something was definitely flanking our movements on the slope. We kept walking, all the while hearing noises which were becoming increasingly unnerving to the two of us. At this point in time, we were not keeping silent and were actually shouting things like, "Go away," and trying to scare off whatever this was. We had just passed through a switchback that opens up into about a 150-foot, somewhat straight run of trail ahead of us when both of us came to a sudden halt. Ahead of us, maybe 75 feet away, was a glaring pair of bright red eyes peering directly at us in the darkness. These eyes were set very widely apart and were more than 10 feet off the ground. In a moment, I felt as though they were almost having a hypnotic effect on me, but I tried to focus on the rest of the image that was before us. Even in the darkness, I could make out a clear outline of something of enormous stature that was rocking from side to side. As we were standing there looking at these eyes, Billy was standing slightly behind me on the trail. He bent down to grab a large rock and hurled it at this thing, hitting it squarely as he shouted, "Get the hell out of here!" Well, when I tell you that all hell broke loose, that would be an understatement. This thing let out a screaming roar that words cannot describe. I thought it would knock us down, and it was deafening to our ears. The two of us turned simultaneously to run back up the trail. I don't think we were 30 feet into our retreat when I heard Rex let out a scream. I turned, and now Rex was on his back, laying on the ground groaning, as this beast was now standing over him, screaming with its mouth wide open and contorting its upper body. I was now maybe 10 feet away from an enormous, roaring Bigfoot standing over my best friend. In the heat of the moment, I guess I did what almost anyone would have done. I took one of my walking sticks, which were nothing more than winter ski poles with the rings removed, and I flung it at this beast sidearm like a whirling sword. God was with us that day because I hit him squarely in the face. I believe it hit him right in the eye. I say that because the beast immediately put both of its hands to its face and started screaming, staggering around on the trail. I now had Rex on the ground reeling in pain and a Bigfoot staggering around screaming. I don't think it was 10 seconds later that the Bigfoot, while holding its hands to its face, lost its footing on the edge of the trail and fell off the side, tumbling down the slope. I knew I had to move and move quickly, so I ran to Rex. As I tried to grab him, he said that his shoulder was broken. He couldn't move his arm, and he was in obvious pain. I told him, "Brother, you've got to get up, or this thing will kill us. We've got to move now." I pulled his pack off, got him to his feet, and we started moving downward. Rex was writhing in pain, but he was moving, and this Bigfoot was screaming and howling on the side of the slope behind us. I think a combination of adrenaline and fear had taken over Rex because he was now moving quickly with my help. For some 15 minutes, we could still hear the beast groaning and screaming behind us. In the moment, I could only think about David slaying Goliath in the biblical narrative with one smooth stone. Eventually, the sounds of the beast were gone, and we covered a considerable distance. We reached a point where we could now see that the sun was beginning to rise, and all I could think of is that we were now safe. It's funny, but in my mind, I actually thought of Dracula not being able to stand sunlight, and I was thinking the same thing about the Bigfoot. All that Billy has been telling you is exactly as it happened. We were now nearing the trailhead and the safety of our vehicle. When we finally got to the car, another vehicle was pulling over to begin the day's hike. When they saw us in the condition that I was in, they asked us what had happened. I needed medical attention, so we wasted no time. We told them that we had been attacked by a Bigfoot that was still up there somewhere, and that we had hit him in the eye with a ski pole and ran. Their jaws dropped so far that they hit the ground. We jumped in the car and took off, and we could see them do the same. When we made it to the hospital, the doctor asked us what had happened, and you can imagine what that led to. After some x-rays were taken, we found that Rex had a fractured clavicle, which, although it was quite painful, was not as bad as it could have been. After a sling was applied, he was feeling a lot better. I then asked the boys, this is me speaking, to fill in any of the details surrounding the event, and here is what they said. As you know already, this all happened quite a few years ago, but when we were in the hospital, Rex told me that as soon as we started to attempt running back up the trail, this creature had grabbed his backpack, slamming him to the rocky ground on his back. He knew immediately that something had broken in his body. Rex said that his body was shaking as this thing stood over him, roaring down at him. This was obviously retribution for being hit with the rock, and who knows, it may have killed both of us right there and then. Even in the darkness, when we were finally in close quarters, I could see the immensity of the beast. I thought I would collapse from fear alone right on the spot, but something welled up within me, and I hurled the ski pole. I guess it was an all or nothing at all fight or flight response. And to be honest with you, I believe there was some divine intervention working for me with that ski pole's flight that night, because I firmly believe the pointed end went right into his eye. The way this thing was staggering and screaming, falling off the side of the slope, he had to have had his eye knocked out. And when I was on the ground, I looked up. Seeing this thing was leaning over me, I cannot tell you how frightened I was. Billy saved our lives that day, I'm sure. If it wasn't for his quick thinking and reaction, I believe it would have killed us or maimed us both. I was 15 feet away from it when I let the pole fly, and it had to be 12 feet tall and as wide as a barn door. The sound of its roar actually made the skin on my face vibrate. It had to have weighed well over 1,000 pounds or more, and that may well be an understatement. We have never gone back there again and wonder every day about those who do. There you have it.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
Absolutely incredible. Yeesh.
You know.
Making the skin on your face vibrate from the yell, that's terrifying.
Yeah, well, I think when I hear stuff like that, I had a '59 Ford pickup truck that I installed air horns on, and I used to get a kick out of pulling up behind people at light, when they were sleeping at the light, and letting the air horns go.
That's awesome.
And the people would just jump out from behind the steering wheel, like, whoa, And I'm thinking about standing in front of a diesel truck horn or something, 10 feet when those things let go. I mean, it's just, and here is this thing. He's describing it as being 12 feet tall and as broad as a barn door. You can imagine the lungs and the bellowing force that this thing can produce.
Yeah, absolutely.
And, I just said to myself, holy smoke, what an escape.
Wow.
And, he's probably right. This thing may have very well, it already proved it was willing to touch them by giving chase and knocking this guy down to the ground by his backpack.
Mm-hmm.
So it took a quick swat at him at whatever it did that floored him backwards and was now standing over him roaring. Who knows? It may have been a second away from just stomping him, to death, or picking him up with his arm and chucking him off the side of the hill, whatever.
Yeah, well, this guy's lucky he didn't get stepped on as this thing's, freaking out after it got its eye stabbed. Why don't you tell us about, I know we were talking earlier and kind of the pre-interview, you're telling me about a new website that you had put together in the last few weeks. Do you want to tell us about that a little bit?
Yeah, well, what I did was I just assembled a page where people can get to my books. Although you could go on Amazon and Kindle and just put in Bigfoot Terror in the Woods, Sightings and Encounters by W.J. Sheehan. There's 5 volumes, soon to be 6. Or you can go to my page, which is www.buybigfootbooks.com. buybigfootbooks.com, and I have a little page there with a little mugshot of myself and a little brief bio. And the books are there with links taking you over to Amazon. So it's kind of neat, this venture is relatively new to me, and as you know from speaking to me, I'm not the most computer savvy character on the planet.
Well, we all have that learning curve with technology. It's a even with this podcast, I mean, there's just so many little things, nuances to learn, and so it's completely agree. But it sounds like you have a working site up to link out to those books. So, and about volume 6, you said that that hasn't been out yet. Is that when's that to be expected to be released?
I would say within the next 4 weeks,
okay,
maybe something like that.
Okay.
I just had it proofed, and I think I told you that I use my daughter, college graduate. She does my proofing for me. And then I always do some rereads myself. So between the two of us, we get the job done, you know. Some people out there have been critical of some of the books, commenting, this was an error or that was an error. And to that I say, do me a favor, read something else.
Exactly. Yeah, it was written by a human being, right? We're all
yeah, and to comment that there was some grammatical errors overlooking the meat that is contained in these volumes, to me is just absurd.
Yeah.
I mean, what's there for anybody, including myself, to read, which I've read all of these volumes many, many times over in the writing of them, and then after the fact. I mean, if I read them and I say to myself, well done, that's a good account of what was said. And, if I'm happy with it, I think that most people, and from the reviews that I get and from the comments of the people, the vast majority of people read these and they're just like, well done, which I can appreciate, or, some of the best stuff I've ever heard in regards to Bigfoot. And to that, I say kudos to you people out there who are enjoying the book, because I wrote it for you. Yes, I wrote it for myself, but I wrote it for other people to read and enjoy and to share. That's what this is all about. I'm not out there to say I'm some world-famous author, and I'm paying somebody $5,000 a shot to proofread my books. That's not the case.
Yeah.
That is not the case, And really, I say it jokingly, but that's the type of dollars that are involved in having a book professionally proofed. You're looking at somewhere around $4,000 or $5,000 a volume, and maybe north of that, to have a quote, linguistic professor go through your work and make any and all corrections, And I guess I would venture to say that there'd be somebody out there that would read that having been done and have something to say about it.
No, and that's the thing, is I think most of the people that are buying these books, and they love the stories, they love the encounters, however big or small the encounter is, they just want to learn more, and they love to be educated and entertained in these stories. And I think that's bulk of the audience that's listening, when they're getting their hands on these books, that's what they're going to go after. And you got a few people, they're going to be critical. Doesn't matter what you put in front of them. They're going to try to find something wrong. That's just the nature of some people, and it's unfortunate. But I think the bulk of the audience, they're in it for what you're in it for, and they're in it for what I'm in it for. They just want to know more about these creatures, be educated, be entertained, to learn more, and just to have those stories in front of us. It's priceless, really. Yeah.
And it's awesome. I have a lot more material. I'm going to be during the cold months of this winter, I'm going to be, my plan is to put some more material together in the form of another book, maybe even two.
Wow.
And, you know, for the people out there, I try to keep these books small, and I do that intentionally. I don't want people to be intimidated by a large volume of anything. I don't want these to appear as a textbook sitting on your coffee table. You know, I'm a big magazine buff. I like scientific journals, air and space, astronomy, historical articles, and things like that. And that's me. I mean, I don't indulge. I mean, I'm a college grad. I know what it is to pick up, anatomy and physiology and have to labor through it for 4 trimesters, 4 quarters. But, I enjoy kind of getting in and out of things more than I enjoy large books. Mm-hmm. And I wanted these books to be in such a way where you could pick it up. You could get in and out of it. If you've got 10 minutes or you've got an hour, you could read and not worry about having to leave off where you left off. Mm-hmm. In other words, you could select a story that's 3 pages and know that you can accomplish that in 10 minutes, or you can go on and read several of the encounters. None of them are super lengthy, other than actually chapter 1 in book 1, the Michigan Upper Peninsula encounter. But that was rather involved, and it required, some time to get it out there, And even that, you can get through that in 15 minutes easily,
mm-hmm. Sure.
So,
well, Bill, this is...
And then,
go ahead.
No, that's okay. I'm good. I'm pretty much finished with
okay.
talking about myself and my book.
No. We're so happy that you're able to come on. I know that there was a lot of people that were, you were on Wes's show not too long ago, and you had a couple episodes that you had shared some encounters with, and we just ate that up, and we're glad that you're able to come on with us today and share some new stories. And for our listening audience, reach out to Bill's website, find his books, and that upcoming volume 6. I'm sure that's going to have some exciting stuff, and it looks like there's more content in the pipeline during your winter months, and going to tease us again with some more material. It sounds like you have a never-ending supply. But again, we just want to thank you that you came on. It was a joy to have you on, and we appreciate the time that you've been able to dedicate to this show today.
That's no problem. We'll do it again sometime, okay?
Perfect. All right, and with that, we'll say goodbye, Bill. And we just wanted to give you a big shout out and a big thanks.
All right, thanks a lot. Thanks to your listeners for tuning in. I hope you enjoy the books and you enjoy what we presented to you today.
Awesome. We all do. I know that for sure. All right, so everybody, we had kind of a wild ride. We had a little bit of technical difficulties in there, so we'll try to get that patched up in the final episode when we get that wrung out. Again, we just wanted to give Bill another shout out. He's got Bigfoot Tear in the Woods, Sightings and Encounters. Released actual releases as volume 1 through 5, and then he has a volume 6 that's going to be released in the coming weeks. Right before Christmas, it sounds like, and then possibly a couple more down the pipeline. So never-ending supply of awesome stories. Bill is a great guy. We've talked to him frequently. Hopefully that doesn't stop. He's a great guy, great listener, and an even better storyteller. So the other thing that we wanted to mention is the Lost River Legends website is up and going. So it's lostriverlegends.com. You can navigate to that page. You can find information about me, Brett, and my colleague James. We have some information there about us, about Lost River Legends, and then obviously the content for the episodes. So we'll have information for all of Bill's books and his website on the show notes. So you'll be able to navigate to that page, find all the information that you need about the books, and we should have link outs to Amazon for all those books as well. So check us out on the website there. Again, it's a process that we've just started. So be patient with us. If something's broke or doesn't work, just let us know. But we're definitely clearing things out and getting things buttoned up as we move along. We also have social channels. We have Facebook. We're on Instagram. We technically have a YouTube channel, but we don't have any content up on there quite yet. So just don't worry too much about that. For the time being, anyway, that's going to be in the pipeline for us soon. But find us on Instagram, Lost River Legends. You'll be able to find us there. And we post content up there frequently. So give us a like, give us a follow. We'd appreciate it. And before too long, we're going to have another episode out. We have several different people in the pipeline that are going to be on upcoming shows. You do not want to miss that. And we can't thank you enough for listening. We appreciate the listens. We appreciate the follows. And as this is coming up and getting off the ground, we just can't thank everyone enough. So, but with that being said, we just wanted to say goodnight, and everyone be safe out there. Take care.